My name is Caleb Mercer. I'm 36. I design residential interiors, not the glamorous kind you see in magazines, but the quiet, practical kind where a family needs their house to finally feel like a home. I work out of a studio in my apartment, which means my mornings start with coffee at a drafting table and the particular kind of silence that belongs to people who live alone by choice and have stopped questioning whether the choice was right. My brother's name was Owen. He was 2 years older than me, which in our family meant he was the one who went first. First to leave home, first to get the job with the title, first to fall in love with a woman who made everyone in the room pay attention. Owen moved through the world with the ease of someone who had never seriously doubted himself. And I don't say that with bitterness. I say it the way you describe weather. It was simply what he was. He married Iris Calloway on a Saturday in September, 7 years ago. I was his best man. I gave a speech that people said was very good. I meant every word of it. What I did not say, what I had not said to anyone, including myself, with full honesty, was that I had been in love with Iris since the Tuesday evening 3 years before that wedding, when Owen brought her home for the first time, and she shook my hand and said, "Owen talks about you constantly." I was starting to think he'd invented you. I told myself it was admiration. Then I told myself it was proximity. Then I told myself it didn't matter, because she was my brother's, and she was happy. And Owen was the kind of man who deserved a woman like Iris. And I was the kind of man who was good at letting the right things go. I let it go. I kept my distance in the way that doesn't look like distance. Showed up for every birthday, every holiday, every Sunday dinner. I watched them build a life. I was genuinely glad for them. Both things were true at the same time, and I carried them both the way you carry something heavy over a long distance. You stop noticing the weight until you set it down. Owen died on a Wednesday in November. A blood clot, sudden and without warning. The kind of thing that happens to other families in news stories. He was 38 years old. He had been at his desk when it happened. He didn't suffer, the doctors said, which is the thing they say when they mean it was fast and there was nothing to be done. I got the call at 7 in the morning. I drove to the hospital. Iris was in a chair in a corridor that smelled of disinfectant and recycled air. And when I came around the corner, she looked up at me with the face of someone who has just had the floor removed from beneath them and hasn't yet understood that they are falling. I sat next to her. I didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say, and Iris was smart enough that anything manufactured would have made it worse. We sat in that corridor for 40 minutes while the hospital moved around us, and at some point she put her head against my shoulder the way you lean against a wall when your legs have stopped working, and I stayed still and let her. That was 3 months before the funeral. The weeks between were the kind that don't have clean shape. There were arrangements and phone calls and his parents flying in from Portland, and the particular cruelty of paperwork that arrives when someone dies, all of it requiring decisions from a woman who was trying to remember how to breathe. I helped where I could. I drove her to appointments. I sat with her when she didn't want to talk and talked when she needed distraction. I brought food on the days she forgot to eat, which was most of them. I told myself this was what family does. It was. It was also something else, which I did not examine. His friends asked how she was holding up. I said as well as you'd expect, which was true and meant nothing. His parents worried about her being alone in the house. I visited more often. I kept a careful accounting in my own mind of what I was allowed to feel and what I was not, and I maintained it with the discipline of a man who has had practice. The memorial service was held on a Friday in February, gray and cold, the kind of day that seems to have made itself deliberately appropriate. The chapel was full. Owen had been a man people liked, which is different from being a man people loved, and the room held both kinds. I sat in the front row with his parents and Iris. I wore the tie Owen had given me the Christmas before last. I don't know why I thought of that while I was sitting there. I just did. The service was what those services are. People said true things about him in formal arrangements, and the truth of them landed differently for everyone in the room. His oldest friend told the story about the camping trip and the wrong map, and everyone laughed in the relieved way that means the emotion needed somewhere to go. I looked at the photograph of Owen on the stand, 38, smiling, in the jacket he wore to every occasion that required a jacket, and felt grief that was genuine and uncomplicated and completely separate from everything else I was carrying. Afterward, in the slow, muted shuffle of people moving from seats to condolences, Iris turned to me. She had been composed all morning in the way that costs something. The kind of compose that holds as long as there are people watching and obligations to meet, and then stops holding the moment the last obligation is satisfied. She turned and she took my hand and she held it the way you hold something you are not planning to release. And she looked at me with eyes that were past performing anything, and she said it quietly enough that only I could hear. I married the wrong one. The room kept moving. Someone was speaking behind us. A child was being settled by its mother near the door. All of it continued, ordinary and indifferent, while those 5 words rearranged something in me that I had spent 7 years keeping carefully in place. I did not respond. I could not have. My chest had done something it is difficult to name. Not a good feeling, not a bad one. Something more like a door opening onto a room I had long since decided was locked. I kept her hand. I looked at the middle distance, and I breathed once, slowly, and I stayed there. She looked away first. She didn't take her hand back. We stood like that for a long moment. Then her mother-in-law appeared beside her with an expression of grief and love, and Iris let go and turned, and became again the woman managing a room full of people who needed her to be all right. I have poor survival instincts around women who are brave. I drove home alone. I sat in my car outside my building for 12 minutes. I am not someone who sits in cars, generally. I am someone who makes decisions and acts on them, which is a professional virtue, and it turns out, a personal liability. Because there was no decision to be made here and no action available to me. And I didn't know what to do with that. She had said it at her husband's funeral, my brother's funeral. It had come out of grief, out of raw and exhausted honesty, the kind that surfaces when the careful management of feeling finally runs out. It could mean 100 things. It could mean that she wished she had married a man who didn't die. It could mean a dozen things that had nothing to do with me specifically. I knew it had something to do with me specifically. That is the honest version. I knew, the way you sometimes know a thing before you have the language for it, that she had said it to me and not into the air. Weeks passed. I did not bring it up. I don't think either of us could have. There is a grief that requires time before anything else is possible. And she was inside that grief and I was standing at its edge. And I understood that what I owed her was patience and steadiness, and nothing that would complicate her process of becoming a person on the other side of loss. I owed that to Owen too, which I thought about more than once at the drafting table in the particular silence of 3 in the afternoon. I kept showing up. I kept being the person I had been. I did not change my behavior or make it smaller or larger. I brought food. I sat with her when she was quiet. I listened when she needed to talk about Owen, which she needed to do often, and which I found, to my own surprise, that I needed too. We told each other stories about him. We laughed at the right ones. She cried a few times, cleanly, without apology, and I didn't treat the crying as a problem to solve. It was not nothing. 4 months after the funeral, on an evening in June when the light was doing something generous with her kitchen window, she made us dinner for the first time since he died. Actually cooked. Standing at the stove with the focused expression she gets when she's decided to do a thing, and we ate and talked about something ordinary and then something less ordinary. And at some point the conversation had been going for 3 hours without either of us noticing. She walked me to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and looked at me for a moment with the expression I had learned over 36 years and a great deal of paying attention means something is about to be said that has been waiting. I've been thinking about what I said at the funeral, she said. I waited. I want you to know it wasn't grief speaking. Or not only. She paused. I've been trying to figure out how long it was true before I said it. I think it was a long time. I think I knew it, and I chose not to look directly at it because looking at it would have meant... She stopped. Her fingers tightened once around the doorframe. Owen was a good man. He was. I want you to know that I know that. I know you know, I said. I loved him, she said. I know that too. She looked at me. This isn't me asking you for anything. I know what it costs to say this. I know how it sounds. I just needed you to know that I meant it, and I've meant it for longer than one morning. The light in the hallway behind her was the yellow kind that makes everything look like an old photograph. She was looking at me with the full, uncalculated honesty of someone who has recently stopped having the energy for anything less. I said, I need to tell you something that I should have told you a very long time ago. She was still. I let it go, I said. I made my peace with it and I let it go because it was the right thing and because Owen was good, and you were happy, and I was not going to be the person who put anything in the path of that. I don't regret the choice. I'd make it again. I looked at her. But I need you to know that when you walked into his apartment the first time and said you thought he'd invented me, I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count. She was very still now. Her eyes were doing the thing they do when she is processing something and has stopped managing her face. That is not me asking you for anything either, I said. It's only fair. You were honest. I wanted to be too. The building around us made its small sounds, a door somewhere below, the low machinery of the elevator. Then she said, we're both carrying the same thing. And we're both going to need time. Yes, I said again. She exhaled slowly. Something in her shoulders released that I had been watching her hold for months. Then come back Thursday, she said, for dinner, and we'll be people who have time. I said that I could do that. She looked at me one more moment, the long, clear-eyed look of a woman who has decided something and is not going to undecide it. And then she said goodnight. And I walked down the stairs and into the June evening, and I sat in my car for a much shorter time than 12 minutes. We were not fast, neither of us could have been, and neither of us tried to be. There were months of Thursdays before anything was named, and months more before it was named to anyone else. And through all of it was the particular tenderness of two people who understand that what they are building has weight and deserves to be built carefully. His parents knew before we told them. His mother called me one Sunday afternoon and said simply that Owen would not have wanted Iris to be alone, and that she had watched me for 36 years and knew my character, and that she was not asking me to explain myself. I thanked her. She said there was no need. A year and a half after the funeral, Iris and I drove back through the town where Owen and I had grown up. We were visiting our mother, nothing deliberate, and we passed the street where the three of us had spent a summer once. The summer Owen had broken his arm and I had spent 6 weeks being his second pair of hands, and Iris said quietly that Owen had told her that story, that it was one of his favorite ones. I told her the version Owen hadn't known, that I had spent the whole 6 weeks pretending I didn't mind because I genuinely hadn't. And that being needed by someone you love without complication is one of the cleaner feelings available to a person. She took my hand on the gear shift without looking away from the road. 2 years after the funeral, when people asked how we found each other, Iris would say simply, we were family first, and that was true. It was the truest version. The rest of the story belongs to a chapel in February, to a corridor in a hospital, to a first Tuesday evening that I had kept quietly for longer than I ever told anyone, and to a woman who said a hard, true thing at the hardest possible moment because she had run out of room for anything less than honesty. Owen would have had something to say about it, something dry and specific, delivered with the ease of a man who moved through the world without much resistance. I think about what that something might have been more often than I can explain. I think he would have understood. I think, I've had to let myself believe this, that he would have been glad. Nothing about loving Iris was new. It had simply, finally, stopped being something I carried alone. What would you have done if someone said those words to you at the worst possible moment, and you knew they meant them? And have you ever loved someone in silence long enough that the silence became its own kind of life? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.